Hey everyone, how's it going? So what am I working on now? I'm working on an Escort still, and I'm going to be replacing the clutch. I figured the motor's out of it. Now's the time to do it. Actually, the customer wants to do the clutch too. So the clutch on this thing has been done at some point in its life. I don't know when. I mean, unless this is an original and this thing has very low mileage, I don't know. I don't know what the mileage was on this motor. So let me just show you real quick. There's a lot of people ask, how does the clutch actually even work? Let me show you. All right, so here is the clutch assembly. This is the pressure plate. Inside here is the disc. You can just see it in there. Let's see. Is that better? See that black piece with the sandwich little piece in the middle? That's the clutch disc. The clutch disc is this piece here, which drives the transmission. This piece here, oops, let me zoom out. This piece here, this is what actually inserts onto the transmission. This is what spins the transmission or gives power to the input of the transmission. This is clamped in place between the pressure plate here. Notice the fingers how they're bowed out. Between the pressure plate here and the flywheel. How does this actually work? This actually works basically like brake pads work. Brake pads stop your car when they're compressed. This allows your car to move when it's compressed. So what happens is, you can actually see the wear mark on the very edge here. Oops. See that wear mark? That's where the throwout bearing applies pressure. When you hit the clutch, there's a fork that presses this thing. So this thing has a bearing right here. Let me zoom out a little bit. This thing has a bearing right here. So it allows it to spin while this stays stationary on those fingers. So what happens is, you press on the clutch, this goes inward, and presses on these fingers, and it's a seesaw. These fingers will pull the pressure plate away and release the plate inside. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to loosen up on the pressure plate itself, and if you pay attention, you will see these fingers move. They are going to come outward. I already got 3 of the bolts out. See how they're moving outward? That's because there's pressure in there. Watch again. Watch right here. See how that whole thing moves? I'll get you on this side so you can watch. Now watch very carefully over here when I loosen this top one here. See how they all move? That's because there's clamping force there, clamping the disc in place. I left one bolt in just for the moment. Let me see if I can show you the center here while I do this. All right, so now that there's no clamping force holding the disc in place, and like I said, the transmission inserts onto here, the input shaft of the transmission. Now this should, but it might be seized in place. See how it moves all over the place? Because there's no more clamping force. As the clutch wears out, this material that is just like brake pads, this material wears out, so you have thinner and thinner and thinner area, and then you lose clamping force. Eventually, the clutch starts slipping, and you're done for. You're not going any further. So let's pop this off here. All right, so pretty simple so far. I mean, it's a very simple way of applying power to something. Now this pressure plate is also held in place with guide pins. Sometimes they're not there. Most of the time they are. All right, so this clutch actually is not in terrible shape. I am not sure if this is a replacement one or not. I feel a little bit of a groove here. Hang on one second. All right. Just going to wipe this down real quick. Now, I think that's a replacement clutch. Now, why do I think that? Can you see these lines that are going like this on here? Can you see those? Yeah, see them? They're kind of going like this. Those are from a flywheel cutter. The factory original flywheel probably did not have those. It was probably just a flat surface. But this looks okay. I'm not concerned about that. This piece in here is called a pilot bearing. And that is where the input of the transmission goes and actually spins on it. Inside there are little roller bearings. See them? So, but we got to change that. Provided the kit came with one, I don't even know. Let me double check, because it may not have come with one. If it didn't, we're not going to replace it, because the customer supplied it. We're going to just make sure that that's what the situation is. Okay, so the kit did come with one. So how the heck do you get this out of there? Believe it or not, you can actually take white bread. You heard me right, white bread. Which I do not have any. You can take white bread and pack in there. And then you have to find something, like I have this punch, which is like a pretty darn close fit. And what you do is you pack the bread in there and you start smacking the punch in, and what will happen is the hydraulic pressure of the bread, believe it or not, will actually force the bearing out. Since I don't have any bread, I'm going to use probably wheel bearing grease or something. Let me see if what I can find that I can use to do this. Okay, so I don't have any white bread, and I don't have any really heavy grease. I mean, I have wheel bearing grease, but the problem is that stuff is a pain to work with because it makes a mess. I do have this, which is angle head grease, they call it. This was for angle head grinders. I haven't used this stuff in forever. I just happen to have it in my toolbox still, and this is a very heavy, pasty type, or like waxy type of grease. So I'm going to take this, and I'm going to pack it in a hole as much as I can, like that. Can you see that? You can see it's in the hole now. Now what I'm going to try to do is take this punch that fits in there. This is like the best fitting punch I got, and it's going to hydraulic the grease. Hopefully. And yes, it started moving it. Okay. So now I'm going to reuse some of this grease, because why waste what I don't have to waste? All right, ready? And as you can see, it is pushing it out, right? You can see that. Gotta make sure. But now where bread comes in handy, believe it or not, is because it's less messy, and it works a heck of a lot better, believe it or not. The first time I heard about that when I was younger, I was just like, you've got to be kidding me. Bread? Yep, no, bread actually works extremely well. And there it is. It's out. Yeah, I wasted some of my grease, but so be it. But there you see it. It's out in all its glory. So just wipe all this excess grease off. Whoops, I just dropped the bearing. And got grease on my leg, but so be it. Part of this business. Getting dirty. Oh, dropped it again, because it's really greasy. Now, the nice thing about doing it that way, too, with grease or with bread is it will usually not ruin or hurt the bearing. You can actually reuse the bearing after you clean it. So here is the bearing, and I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. So we're going to save it. I mean, not we're going to save it, but if we needed to reuse it for whatever reason, we could, but we're not going to. So now, what we're going to do is we are going to clean out the end of the motor here, because this is the end of the crankshaft. Let me get another rag, because now this one's just a mess. And usually for stuff like this, I try not to use brand new clean rags. I try to find a rag that I've been using for something else that might be a bit dirty. All right. I mean, they make pinion bearing pullers and stuff like that, and I actually have like a small puller set, but usually it's more work doing it that way than it is doing it this way. All right, so now we have to drive this one in place, and this one will go in and it'll bottom out on that ridge there. So what we're going to do is we're going to tap this in place. We're going to get a socket or something that's going to fit over this and drive it in place. They make installers for these things too, but I don't have an installer. That's why we're going to use a socket. And you want to be gentle too, and you want to try to make sure you're going in as straight as possible. See, sometimes if you start to go in a little bit cockeyed like I did there, use the flatter end of the socket, the drive end, to try to straighten it out. Because you can actually hear it. It'll want to slip in when you're at the right angle. Or correct angle, I should say. And I'm basically just going to bring this down to right where the bevel ends. And I'm just about there. Perfect. I'm happy with that. You don't have to bottom it all the way out. But if you did go in all the way and bottom it out, it'll stop on that ledge in there. But that's good. That's good. That's perfectly fine. And I'm pretty sure that that thing is already pre-greased. Yes, it is. So I'm not too worried about that. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to get a clean rag and we're going to wipe this surface down. And we are also going to clean that pressure plate before we put that together. We just wipe any excess grease off first. And I'm not overly concerned about like little hot spots here and there. It should be fine. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take brake clean on a rag. And we're just going to wipe down this surface here. Make sure it's clean and free of oils and stuff like that. And then also your pressure plate, wipe it down. Make sure that you get off any oils or greases that could be on there. So now, what we're going to do is we're going to sandwich everything together. The clutch disc itself goes on one way. As you can see, hopefully you can, one side sticks out a bit compared to the other. Usually the side that sticks up or out, that side usually faces the pressure plate. Matter of fact, on this one, it says gearbox side right there. So gearbox side is the side away from the transmission, away from the engine. Sometimes it'll say flywheel side on this side. So what we're going to do is we're going to sandwich this thing, gearbox side into the pressure plate, and then we're going to line up bolt holes and these pins. Now what you can do too, you see what I'm doing here? You could do it this way, or you could do it this way. You could take the alignment tool. This is an alignment tool that they give you. Stick it through the disc and then onto the flywheel like that. And stick this over it and get it caught. Now we can catch bolts. Usually I will catch 2 bolts before you let it go. And I will screw them down with my fingers pretty much until it hits the lock washer. All right. So now that's pretty close. You will have some movement here. Usually what I do is I try to make sure everything is as centered as possible. You know, wiggle it around, try to figure out where center is roughly. That'll be close enough. And then catch the rest of your bolts in here. And then as we go to tighten down, if you pay attention to the fingers, you'll see them start to move because you're putting pressure on the disc, hence pressure plate. Like I said, I usually will screw them down the first time all the way down to they make contact. Like that. So now we can start to tighten this up. Now, you don't want to zap it all down in one shot. If you're doing it by hand, do a little bit each time, and go in a circular pattern, going every other or crisscross or something along those lines. But as I go to tighten this down, as you'll see the fingers start to move. Okay, so that should all be good. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to double check those by hand and make sure that everything is good. Just getting a hand ratchet and the 13. Now if you go to tighten these up, try to go like opposite of where you're at, like to tighten, like don't have this out like this because you're going to be rotating everything. If you go with this, this is the most restriction you're going to have, most resistance rather. So I just do that to check. Oh, and you can pull clutch alignment tool out. Hold on to those, they come in handy. Because you never know when you got to pull something apart and pull the clutch off without replacing the clutch, to only find out that you need this tool to put everything back together. Although you can eyeball it sometimes, depending on the situation. All right, that's pretty much it. And as you can see, looking in there is not a heck of a lot of distance in between there, between the actual clutch disc and the pressure plate. So those fingers only move a little bit, and then it releases. All right, that's going to end that video. Hopefully you got something out of that. If you did, hit that like button. If you could, please subscribe. Hopefully I explained a little bit to you about how clutch actually works. Hopefully you learned something. All right, guys, have a great day. Keep wrenching.